Okay, welcome everyone to this concluding session for the Rome Book Club on Write Useful Books. And just as we started, we have Rob Fitzpatrick here, the author of the book, to have a quick Q&A. So it has been a very interesting journey, and personally, I'm in my path towards making my Rome book a what you call this a book that everyone else could read is now clear. And if you look at the shared graph and filter for my name and to-dos, you will see there essentially my to-do list of how to make that happen. So mid 2022, that's my target. And I know that several of you have also committed to starting or continuing to write your books or to talk with your readers. So without further ado, let us start this Q&A. And just as like last time, let's just raise our hands using this, what you call this, the feature of what you call this, Zoom. And yeah, we could start with Joan.
Good morning. Rob, I want to tell you that your book is, I don't want to use too many adjectives. It's eye-opening, right? You want to say it's formulaic, but it's not, because there's the steps and then there's the pieces that the person reading has to put into it. But the path that you give is one, both optimistic, two, really practical, and the way you write it is very welcoming. You're not doing it to separate yourself from the reader, or in our case, the reader writer. You're doing it so that you're in the same place we are. And I think I just want to tell you, that's a huge gift, enormous. I live on the East Coast, where people's intellect is their bulletin board, it's their billboard, and people, do you know what I'm saying? There's so much space between their brain and your brain that this was just a huge gift to read. A practical question is, like Kikil, and we've been very motivating with each other. I have a to-do list, and some days I have an enormous amount of energy, and I like tackle them and embrace them and like wrestle them to the ground. And other days I look at it and I do everything else but. So my question is around pacing, and I know there's little tricks, but around pacing and allowing yourself to have those days where you attack and those days where you don't. And do you have a mantra, or I would sound stupid, but do you have some other secret sauce that isn't in your book for staying with it? Do you know? Okay, that's enough. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the kind words. I'm glad you found the book relevant, and that means a lot to me. So, and a funny thing on the first part is, and like the sounding smart part of it, I found that the more I know about something, the harder it gets for me, and also the less smart I sound about it, because you start to be aware of all the edge cases and the subtleties. And it's like, as your competence raises, so does your understanding of the problem space. And so I feel like it always stays difficult. You're just focused on the next set of problems to hopefully do a better job. So it's I find it quite humbling to do whenever I'm trying to make stuff. But as for the practical stuff and staying in the groove, I've noticed that every author cares about some part of the process and doesn't care about other parts of the process. So for me, my favorite part is the first draft. I love the blank page. I love just getting into the zone and just writing. And the bit I don't enjoy is the editing. To me, it feels quite mechanical. It feels like just tedious labor. Where I've spoken to other authors who say they hate the blank page, and their trick is just to write garbage because they find that the editing is something that they like that. It's solvable for them. Others really enjoy the marketing, being out there, like Arvid Kahl, who I mentioned in the book. his favorite part is just engaging with readers at all stages, from Twitter through to beta reading through to the newsletters afterwards. And I think one of the tricks is to find the piece you love, and enjoy that part. But that's not going to be the hard part for you. The hard part is all the grindy bits, whether they come before or after. And the best advice I found is to figure out when your best hours are and try to give it at least one of those hours per day. Some people's best hours are in the afternoon, some are in the morning. For me, it's first thing before I check the day's drama. If I look at email, I'm essentially so wound up that I'm unable to get into that focused place to do my writing. So I have to do it first thing before I engage with the rest of the day. But, different authors vary. And then the other thing that's very motivating for me is it's easy to talk ourselves out of it through some variant of imposter syndrome and concern that either like we shouldn't be the one to write the book, or even if we do write it, is anyone gonna care about it? Is it gonna matter? Is it worth the investment? There's a lot of ways to talk yourself out of it along the way. And so for me, I don't try to avoid or outwit imposter syndrome. I try to convince myself that it is worth writing because I've proven that readers care. And that's why for me, the reader conversations and the beta reading and to some extent writing in public, yes, it helps you make a better book. But for me, it also shows me that what I'm writing is worth the effort and that my readers want it and that it matters and that it's worth grinding through the bits of the process I don't enjoy.
Okay. Thank you.
My pleasure. But again, your mileage may vary.
All right.
Everyone seems to have their own process.
Thank you.
Next up is CK Lin.
Hey, Rob. It's 4 a.m. over here in the West Coast, so thank you so much it's been a while since I've been up at 4. But definitely talking to you is worth it. One of the things I really found your voice and who you are, everything that you do is super accessible per what Joan said earlier. It's really, really refreshing. And similar to the point, of the imposter syndrome, the insecurity of being relevant, whether or not it's useful for others. So as a follow-up there, do you write in public? Do you just actively engage with people so as you have more reader conversations and you found more and more that whatever you're writing, you're thinking about is useful? Because I think I love what you're saying, but at the beginning part of it, it's I don't have enough reader conversations yet. So how do you go about doing that?
I think the kind of optimal answer is going to depend on the way your book is organized and the type of content you're talking about. So some authors, each chapter is more or less a standalone unit. And when that's the case, writing in public works extremely well because the ideas from it work as blog posts or articles or videos or Twitter threads. And you can start to test the individual ideas, see what resonates, find the way to describe it, the anecdotes, the examples, get some of the criticism. And this is what Marty Kagan does with his books. It's what Arvid Kahl does with his, and it works really well. For me, it feels a bit more unnatural because the way I write tends to be, I tend to write about processes or teaching. And so chapter 4 doesn't make any sense without chapters 1 through 3, that's not to say it's impossible, but I haven't found a way to do it for the types of books that I've been writing so far, where it made a ton of sense. And even with the mom test, hilariously, I remember I had a blog post called like the mom test, I've invented this thing. And it was before the book came out. And it was not even a blip on the radar. Like no one cared. Like the idea didn't work as a blog post. It kind of needed to become a book for people to get it. April Dunford told me the same thing. She said before she wrote Obviously Awesome, she had tried, her words were great. She said, I tried to blog my way through it and I realized I couldn't because it didn't work as standalone pieces. It needed to be a process and it needed the mental space that a book creates. When someone buys a book, they're kind of opening up a multi-hour space of focused attention to engage with your material. And some types of content require that. And so they don't work as well. Anyway, all that being said, so I don't do a lot of writing in public. I think it's probably a mistake on my part. It's probably suboptimal, but I haven't figured out a clever way to do it. Some of the alternatives that I'm trying is I do try, as soon as I have the idea, I try to start coaching people or helping them. It's like, hey, and talking to them and understanding them. So I'm like, hey, I'm researching this. Let me help you out. Or like, hey, I've been through this and I'm thinking of writing some stuff. Let me help you out with it. Totally free. I'm going to benefit from research and you benefit from the help. And that's my solution to like my content not working as a write in public sort of thing. But then the beta reading kind of merges into it. Once I've got a coherent piece of the manuscript, it doesn't need to be the whole thing, but enough to deliver a significant unit of value. It goes to beta readers. And if they like it, what I did is I just put it up for sale. I said, hey, if you want to give me beta feedback, I'm just going to call it early access. And this was already several iterations through beta reading. And at that point, I knew it mostly worked. I knew the value was there. Saw tons of problems, but I was like, okay, and that I wasn't writing in public, but I was starting to market it and people were reading my stuff. And I think for Write Useful Books, I did about $20,000 in pre-sales that way by basically charging for the early access. And it was also really nice because it meant that I wasn't starting my marketing on launch day. I was able to start it a bit in advance. And of course, it's seed marketing. You don't need to do it forever, but marketing does work. So that's how I approached that. And something else that came from Austin Kleon with his book, Show Your Work. He says that, you don't need to be sharing your writing. You can be sharing your process, your learning, your dead ends, your behind the scenes. He makes this wonderful observation that people are as interested in the process of a creator as in the output of a creator. And that can be your writing. It's not writing in public, it's working in public. You're showing your work, not like your working process, not your work output. So, some version of that, but you got to be in touch with people. It's so hard. A book is basically a 4-hour long monologue. And imagine doing that blindfolded, unable to see the audience. It's going to be so hard. You got to know how your audience is reacting to what you're laying down. And whether you do it through one-on-one conversations, writing in public, a lot of beta reading, however you want to make it work, but you need that data.
I appreciate it very much. So what I got real quick is the space that you're working in, sometimes people are not even problem aware. So therefore, you have to educate them on even what the problem is before you tell them even what the solution is. That's kind of what I got. And you engage them by having them raise their hands and saying, hey, here's something I'm researching, blah, 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 and then have them come to you that way.
That is sometimes true, yes, but you can also scope your way around it. So when you're deciding your scope, you're deciding who your reader is, what they already know, and what your book is going to help them do. So you're deciding who they are and where they are in their journey, like which moment in their journey is it right for them. For example, the mom test, my book about customer interviews, it works best after someone has already tried to do some customer interviews and had a hard time. That's like the moment in their journey where they love the book and it's life-changing. If they read it before they've done any, they go, this sounds obvious. Like I already knew this, but they didn't, but they don't know that they didn't know it, right? They need that. So there's a moment in the journey as well as who they are. And if they're earlier in their journey, then you might have to explain like, hey, customer interviews are important and this is why they're hard. If they're later in their journey and you get to choose as the author, then you don't have to explain that because they've already experienced it in their life. So whether or not you need to educate them about the problem is really your choice. Like where in their journey are you engaging with them?
Super duper, thank you.
All right. Next is Ellie.
Hey Rob, just wanted to say that first off, your book mom test is like a Bible here where I'm from for startups. So I'm a customer experience and user experience by professional, so by profession. So it's pretty much a standard when we talk about it in the startup space. What my question is particularly towards what habits would you say you've developed or you recommend people writers start building up? And I think it's good for us to baseline ourselves versus someone like you who's already done it. What are your like top habits that you develop across the years that's stuck around and you think would have been your source of strength or had made your success?
Teaching and helping people is a huge one. Teaching is the MVP for a book. At least for this type of useful educational book, teaching, coaching, whatever, it is the smallest version and the fastest to iterate. So that habit's really useful. And another one is this is more worldview or philosophy, but you're not trying to prove yourself right. You're trying to, there's some idea or some piece of knowledge that you have discovered and you care about, or there's some reader that you care about and you want to help, or there's there's some spark within the book, right? Which is your reason for bothering, because it takes a lot of time. You always have to preserve that. You never compromise that. But a lot of extra stuff around that core that you care about is up for grabs, you know? Like with Write Useful Books, like is it written for traditionally published authors or independent authors? Well, independent authors care about it more, so fine. You know, it's like the bit I care about wasn't sensitive to that. So I'm like, okay, there's a piece I care about, which is you should design books like products, but everything else is up for grabs. And my job is to find the version of it and find the people and like connect them, right? And so that willingness to preserve the bit you care about, but be flexible with the rest, I think is an important piece of worldview. And that people ask me sometimes how I deal with like the rejection and finding out readers hate it and finding out I'm wrong, which ideally all happens at beta reading, not post publication. And the reason is because of this worldview. Like I want to know where I'm wrong, because I want to find the best packaging and the best delivery mechanism for the idea that I care about. I want it to get out in the world, to endure and to grow. And I can only do that if if I wrap the right stuff around it. So that's part of it. Then other just general habits. One is daily pages. I got this from the book, The Artist's Way.
Artist
And
way.
basically, you've had some experience with this. You've done it.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And for anyone who doesn't know, the idea is that you wake up and just on paper, longhand, you just write, you just brain dump, stream of consciousness. And the way it works for me is I find if there's some top of mind concern that's occupying your attention, it's very hard to focus on your writing. And by doing this brain dump first thing, one, it gets you flowing and putting down words, but also it identifies these unidentified top of mind concerns. And once they're on paper, for me at least, it sort of helps me process it and gets it out of my head so that I can then return to a kind of neutral space for my writing or my focus work or whatever it is. That's foundational for me. And the other is just to know my writing time. So for me, I wake up, I do my stuff, I do my morning, I drink some coffee, play some chess, do my pages. And then from 10 a.m. up till 1 p.m., I just don't schedule things. And obviously I have the luxury of like writing is my job. Other people have to wake up earlier or like make time. And sometimes I don't write for the whole 3 hours, but I make sure that that time's available and not interrupted by meetings so that if I'm on a roll, I can use up to those 3 hours to make some good progress. And but I don't know, there's a secret. Like we were talking to Nir Ayal in our little writers community, and someone asked him, like, Nir, how do you make writing a habit? And he goes, it is never a habit because it's never going to be automatic. Every day it's a choice and every day it's hard work. And so that's like not a habit, right? That's a choice you make. It does get easier to make the choice over time, sure. But you still got to choose to do it. It's like,
Thanks, Rob. A follow-up question on the morning pages habit that you have.
Yeah.
Is there a particular, I'm just asking about the tool, or are you just writing it on your notepad, or are you, there you go. I was going to say Rome.
So I've got this, I did use Rome for it for a while, but for me, doing anything at the computer feels like work. And for me, it's more important to clear my head than to capture my thoughts, at least for this particular part of my process. So yeah, this is it for me.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob.
All right. Next up is Guy.
Hi, Rob. I'll try and put my camera on. I think I was ironing in the background, so I was being distracting. I apologize, but can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. All right. Okay, so I'm just finishing a dissertation. It's all about psychedelics, and it's been talking to mental health professionals who use psychedelics in their private life to sort of enhance their practice and their self-awareness. I've really got to grips through interpretive phenomenological analysis of understanding my own experiences from psychedelic healing. I'm a veteran myself, and then sort of using my sort of hypothesis to sort of understand other people's experiences, which has been great. It's like taught me a lot about like what like beta testing is. It's like actually it's testing my ideas with my professional understanding as a psychologist and seeing what people come back with, and then I write that down. And I want to write a really helpful book for veterans, because obviously I've just gone well, not obviously, but I've just gone through this massive journey of healing from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, suicidal ideation. I want to write a really poignant book and sort of interview a lot of veterans on their own sort of feelings, understanding about what I've sort of come to terms with, to see what's true and then what's sort of universally true. Do you have any advice on when I start that journey on having those interviews with those people, how to sort of, I've already done a lot with Rome research and how to manage large amount of data and putting it in there using Dragon software so I can speak into it and get all this down in text. But I feel like it's going to be a big task if I aim too big. Like, what's the sort of right numbers that I should be sort of looking at, maybe?
So I've never written that type of book, so I don't know. There are certainly lots of examples, and I can tell you a few anecdotes that I've heard from other authors. So Ryan Holiday writes these very like research, anecdote, case study heavy books, and he's written a bunch of them. And before then, he worked as the kind of researcher for Robert Greene, who writes, the 50 Laws of Power, Mastery, etc., who also has a similar process. And what I understand from what I've heard from Ryan is that it was basically his full-time job when working for Ryan Greene. He'd be like, I'm trying to make this point, like, go find me all like the stories you can find from this, from like the obscure history books, from unknown business case studies. And Nirayal mentioned this as well. Someone asked him how he finds such interesting examples and case studies and anecdotes. And his answer was a combination of primary research, like doing the work, having the interviews himself, and also going to obscure original sources. Because he says, like, if you're pulling from other books, then you're always going to be repeating examples. And your most experienced readers, who are your biggest evangelists, are going to hate that if they see. But it sounds like you're doing the original research. And so then how do you capture that? I have no idea. I would probably be looking into asking academic writers, because they're going to be the ones who are also doing the most of this kind of original research that then is driving their stories. And I don't know, but I certainly think you don't want to reinvent the wheel. It is going to be time consuming. It like is going to be work. So if that makes you feel any better, it's like there's probably not a magic bullet or a magic solution. But on the other hand, it's worth it, because as you say, it's a super important topic. It's something there's not enough information about. It's hugely important to people. And it's like, if you do that work, it's going to be valuable.
Thank you.
All right. Next question is from Tom.
Rob, what I loved about the book was that it was basically an example of the content of the book. And it's great to see those two things together. I had just a technical question. When you're talking about early access and you're talking about a draft, how are you distributing that to people?
So the tool chain I used was, I did my beta reading through helpthisbook.com, which I built. So, disclaimer on that. But I did it as a reaction to at scale, when you're dealing with lots of readers and lots of comments, Google Docs kind of breaks down. And I wanted something that was custom built for it. And then that's where like the manuscript lived. And when people basically signed up or paid, they paid through Gumroad. Gumroad was hooked up to Zapier, and then Zapier sent them an email through my personal Gmail, so that they'd be able to reply and we could get into a conversation that way. And the email basically said like, hey, thank you so much for supporting me. The best way that you can help me is to read on this web version at helpthisbook.com/blah, blah, blah. And there you can leave all the comments, and that's the most useful for me. However, like, you did pay for early access, so there's also a PDF attached, and the ebooks and whatever else, so that people I expressed my preferences, but I still gave them the options. And then whenever there was a major new version, so after each iteration of beta reading, I kind of kept numbered versions of 0.91, 0.92, et cetera. And then and that was every 2 to 6 weeks, more or less, I would have a new version. I would send that out to the list and say like, hey, here's the latest version if you're curious. As always, I appreciate the feedback on this web link, but if you just want it here, that's fine. And then once it was finished, the hardest part of pre-orders, so like Gumroad collected the money in emails, Zapier sent the automated reply, Help This Book captured the feedback. And the hardest part is sending out paperbacks, because paperback delivery is really hard in certain countries. So you can use Ingram Spark and Amazon author copies through KDP to send out individual print-on-demand copies to people. It takes 5 minutes per person, because you need to put in everyone's address and all that. it costs you about $5 per book, maybe $7 if you include shipping. But then some countries like India have really difficult import laws. And so you start needing to email people to get their IDs and their phone numbers. And I think if I was doing it again, I would limit the paperback deliveries to certain countries where I knew that fulfillment would be simple. Or I would say you're pre-ordering the digital version. So like PDF, Kindle, audiobook, Rome, because the paperback fulfillment is kind of a chore at the moment. And that's the way I did it. The other thing I did is at a certain point, I set up a community of readers on Slack, and the early access kind of pre-orders had the choice to opt in to the community. And originally it was like a one-time, when they bought early access to the book, they also got the community forever for free. Now the community costs $20 a month or something. And that meant every time they joined, I was like, hey, here's a Calendly if you ever want to talk about your book. That gave me a ton of one-to-one conversations to understand where the book was or wasn't working and what they were struggling with and concerned about. And so I kind of combined all of these learning tools, and the early access was a way to make sure, begin the marketing early, improve the cash flow, make sure I wasn't crazy, and also isolate the most passionate customers. Because folks like Khalil, who came in that early access group, they were choosing to pay for an unfinished book. So I knew that they really cared about the book's outcome. So it meant that I really cared about their feedback, because they were like my super early adopters, the evangelists. And it's great. You don't want, at a certain point, you don't want to be listening to like free users, because they're not representative of your final buyers. So I started first few iterations free and then shifted to this model. And yeah, Gumroad, Zapier, Help This Book, and Slack for the community was my tool stack.
Great. Thank you.
Next question is from Remy. You're on mute, Remy.
Hardware mute, I think.
Yeah, so I just posted in chat for Guy and anybody else who's interested. There's this phenomenal article with step-by-step of how to record qualitative research in Rome, literally with the codes to do for each interview and then how to summarize it back up. It's in the chat. And I've used it and I highly recommend it. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Joan. Let's try again, Remy. Let me unmute you.
Okay, is
Okay.
it good now? Yeah?
It's very faint, but we could hear you.
Oh, shit, wait. Well, let me try something else, just a sec. If somebody
you-
wants to ask a question.
You're fine, Remy. I can hear you clearly.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks. First of all, I want to say thank you, Rob. That was actually a truly useful book. And also thanks, Riley, for introducing the book to us and organizing this book club. Because the book club really allowed me to really go deep on the book about how to write useful book, to take notes, and to make the ideas my own, so I can really have the framework in my head. And to be truthful, it was instrumental in realizing how doable it is to write a useful book. From the moment I don't try to rush the process. So if I take my time, I will get there. If I take the time to be sure the content work and the people want it, in the end, mechanically, it will be a good book and it will work. It's the beauty of it. I love it. And it came at a moment on top of that, or basically many advice we found online is about, quality comes last and volume must come first. And I tried that, and you can ship product that way, that's for sure, but it's not fun, and it's not cool neither to not feel proud of my work. So I'm very happy to having found this framework for being able to focus on quality without wondering will it work, because the reasoning for volume first is that most of your product will bomb and you need volume to make it work, and quality then comes in the way of volume. So thank you, because it was really a breath of fresh air to be able to say, okay, I don't have to ship a product or a course or a book in 2 months. I can take my time, ship it in a year or two, and that will work and that will be valuable. So Thank you very much. On top of that, it's portable for programming course. I teach programming. And I think the process also works for teaching other things than books. It works with online courses or stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Verifying.
I my second book about the workshop survival guide, one of the big concepts we had in education is that you need to test it. Like you need to test the exercises, you need to test the examples, the learning outcomes, the structure. And in terms of the time cost, that's not viable if you're doing free workshops or if you're, talking to students for a few $100s. But as you get into the higher price tiers, or if you're creating something like an online course where it's repeatable, it really pays off to put in that extra effort and to iterate and improve the educational content, because then it's going to pay off in a much more leveraged way. And so if we were billing it, there's a different design process depending on whether it's a one-off that's cheap, a super premium one-off, or a long-lasting product, right? And you treat each of them differently. So it's a great observation you make.
And that's amazing, because I want to go to a premium product. I love to spend time to do things in high quality, disregarding the time it takes. So I want exponential results from that. I don't want a bomb, and this framework is very instrumental, I think, because it's very three phases. First, you verify that the lesson works and the content works. Then you polish it. It's phase 2. And then I think it's also very important is that you really set the target for hustling through the first 1,000 copies, because I might have thought, okay, I gave my best, I created that awesome course, and now nobody buys it, and I would have been very sad. And now knowing that I have to, once it's done, I have to really push to sell it 1,000 copies, I think was great advice to know in advance, because now I can prepare myself. There's 3 phases. I get the content right, then I polish it, then I hustle it for the first 1,000 copies. And if I did my job right, I can then shift my focus. So it's great. Thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome. I hope it proves useful.
Yeah. If I can ask a question, I would love to ask your advice on, because now I have a lot of ideas on the things I want to start to, on push that I want to focus on. And there's 2 things I want to focus on, and I would love your advice on that. The first one is I want to use that process, which is I understand it's long term. It's like a 1 or 2 year process. And I want to use that for using that process of writing a book to learn, to get better at soft skills like copywriting for solopreneur or infopreneur, or to use that to explore new ideas like using Worm or learning how to edit stuff. And I know I can't do everything at the same time, but what I plan to write several books in my life now, or at least to create several info products following that framework. But what's your advice on which one should I start first?
I would start where you're most curious or excited. Is probably the easiest to get through, because it is it's a grind sometimes. And if you don't care, it's pretty tempting to give up halfway. And then, it's like, that's all waste. So you've got to be excited enough to get through to the finish line and unlock the value for both you and the other people. The other approach is that some skills are compounding assets. And if they're compounding assets, like audience building, for example, is a compounding asset. The sooner you start, because audiences tend to increase as a percentage of themselves rather than by a fixed amount. And so the earlier you start, the sooner you get to that, past the slow early stage, which might, affect the decision. But truthfully, I've never been an optimizer. I'm very much like, I look for good enough. I look what's going to, be good enough for my finances, but also make me happy. And it's like, so I'm probably not the right person to ask about the optimal answer to these things.
Well, you managed to write 3 books, so I guess I'm gonna follow follow your curiosity and excitement advice, and I won't try to optimize. Thank you very much.
All right. A second question from Ellie.
Yeah, just hi Rob again. Just a quick question. I typed in chat. You wrote 3 books, and I was just listening to Neil Parishka's podcast on 3 books, and I was curious. What are your 3 most influential books for you? That has really helped you. Yeah.
The number one was almost certainly The Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And the gist is that the stuff that matters, that makes a difference, is stuff that you couldn't have predicted, because everything that you can predict kind of gets priced in to, you know, your expectations about the future and whatnot. And the way it gets applied to entrepreneurship is that you need to protect your downside. Like, you can't risk blowing up. If something unexpected happens, you can't risk that bankrupting you. But then you want unexpected things to give you disproportionate upside. So writing a book, I think, counts as this, because the worst you can lose from writing a book is, say, the time you put into writing it. But what you can gain is a complete transformation of your reputation, your leverage, your finances, your access to other interesting people. So that, to me, is a asymmetric bet with like fixed downside. Not trivial, like it's expensive in time to write a book, but it's fixed, it's limited, you can predict it, and then the upside is uncapped. And I was like, okay, I like that. It's not as uncapped as, for example, making a hyper growth startup. That has much more upside, but it was still, you know, a way to get into it. So I like that. That was very influential. Other ones, the E-Myth Revisited is about building processes into not tech businesses, but more like in person. And I applied a lot of the process building to my own, you know, life and work and all of that. And probably another one that I mentioned in the book is The War of Art. And I know not everyone likes this because it's a bit like fuzzy, spiritual, et cetera, about creativity. But for me, it's the book I probably open most often whenever I'm stuck with my work. There must be a bunch of others. The one I enjoyed most recently is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, about negotiation. I just thought that was such a beautifully written book, and I learned a lot from it.
Thank you very much. That's very insightful. Thanks.
All right. Next up is Isaac.
Hi, Rob. I really like the formatting on your Kindle books. All three of them are very well done. I was wondering how you went about it. Did you hire someone, or do you have like a process in place? Because the fonts were right, everything is like fitting very well. So
yeah, the Kindle is a pretty constrained format. There's not a lot you can do with it, and you can play with it right now. So if you get Amazon has a free tool called the Amazon Kindle Create, and you basically copy paste your text in or open certain file formats, and it has a little software emulator that shows you what the text will look like on different Kindles. And there's some best practice, like you can force the fonts, but you're not supposed to, because you're supposed to let the user's kind of default fonts take over. You're meant to keep your images and your layout simple, because the images, you can't do anything fancy, you know, so it's like big images that just interrupt the flow of text is kind of what works on Kindle. And there's some stuff like that. And as you play with it, there's a little bit of creativity you can do with the titles and the spacing, but really there's not much. And I think when they come out looking ugly, it's just because people have directly kind of taken their paperback or PDF and just done like a save as ebook. And that doesn't work because things get messed up around the lists, around the images, around the tables. So it's just something you look at. We do it ourselves, but I've got a little team. So, you know, Teresa, my girlfriend, manages all the kind of Amazon stuff, the advertising. I did the original mom test layouts myself, but for the second and third book, Teresa, you know, did all of that stuff. It's super easy to hire for. It's very cheap to outsource and delegate. And to me, the decision is around how quickly you want to make updates, because you don't want to be slowed down by the speed bump of having to wait for or find a freelancer every time you want to make an update. So to me, if you're doing quick iterations, you want to learn how to do it yourself. If you don't plan to update the book post launch, you can just hire a freelancer and save the time. The hardest layout is the paperback. The others are pretty easy, honestly. And there's some good tools. If you're on Mac, Vellum is really good, and especially for ebooks. And there's a new one called Atticus, made by the dude behind Kindlepreneur. I haven't tried it, but it looks even better than Vellum and a bit more flexible. So there's good tools. But then if you need custom layouts and really fancy footnotes and tables and all that stuff, you're stuck back to doing it yourself, because the tools that are beautiful aren't flexible.
No, I really like the form. I have a ton of Kindle books, so it's really beautiful. Especially the first mom test is like quite nice. So
thank you.
It is well done.
I think we use Vellum for mom test. We did Workshop Survival Guide using MS Word, like completely from scratch, and then moved it over to Kindle Create. Vellum does all of the mom test formats, and we use actually Google Docs. I used to do everything of Write Useful Books. Oh, and there's some guides. If you go to writeusefulbooks.com/resources, there's some guides about how to do all the formatting and the different trade-offs between the tools. I wrote a couple like in-depth how-tos on those because it's just, I didn't want to include it in the book because it's very software dependent. So I put all those guides on writeusefulbooks.com/resources.
Yeah, thanks. That was very useful.
All right. Next up is Lee. Ali, you have to unmute.
Well, what was the second book you mentioned after Black Swan? Hello?
Oh,
You're mute.
the E-Myth Revisited. It's from the 80s, and it's written in quite a strange way. It's kind of this long made-up story interwoven with business advice about him coaching a young entrepreneur in running her coffee shop and preparing it for scale. And my background was all in technology entrepreneurship, and which tends to gloss over the human processes side of things because we everything's baked into the software. And so for me, that idea of like building these human processes as a core part of your business and your product, and for me also my life, like I have ADHD, so if I'm not organized with my processes, I completely fall off the wagon and nothing gets done. So having that, like, that's where I learned about process building. A similar kind of book is the Checklist Manifesto, but I prefer E-Myth.
So what's the name of it again?
I'll type it into chat. E-Myth Revisited, and it's great actually. I recommend it a lot. Oh, and then War of Art was another one that I mentioned. Never Split the Difference. There's so many good books. I mean, man, nonfiction. It's like what a blast right now. There's a lot of garbage, but there's also just when you read a book and you're like, wow, this is a life's experience. What a pleasure to find those books.
Cool.
Thank you.
So Rob, I have a question. For those of us who are writing books with a software component, I think Elaine is also planning to write a book for a Mac app, and I'm writing something related to Rome and other tools for thought. Like, do you have any best practices on like, or any practices related to something like that, something that would change quickly?
Yeah. So kind of expect that you're going to be making updates and consider this both a cost and a competitive advantage because most authors, especially traditionally published authors, are very slow to release their updates. So if you can keep up with the software changes, that sets your book apart. And you can also use that as a very solid justification for people to get on your email list. Maybe not if you're using it as like an every week marketing list, but if you say, hey, this stuff changes, I release updates within 4 weeks of this stuff changing, put your email here and make sure you always hear the latest. That's a pretty compelling value proposition for folks to join your list and get into direct contact with you, which then gives you the customer relationship and tends to massively increase the profitability. Because if you're just selling the book, I can't remember who said this recently, but they said Amazon gives you transactions, not customers. And if you want the customers, you need to build that email relationship with them. And in some cases, some authors have even chosen not to list their books on Amazon. Alex Hillman did this with the Tiny MBA, and he used Lulu Press plus Shopify to basically sell print books through his own website in a way which gave him every customer's email address. And if the updates were really important, and he thinks he's like, yes, I'm sacrificing sales because people go to Amazon, they don't find it, they give up. I don't benefit from Amazon's flywheel of being the #1 bestseller, et cetera. However, he thinks that's worth it because he has a business that serves these types of customers. And so for him, getting the customer relationship is 10 times more valuable. And it's something to think about, and also if you want to do these digital upsells, like you can sell a book for $20, but weirdly, you can sell a digital only book for $50. You can sell the course for $250. You can sell the template pack with the walkthroughs for $200. So in some ways, even if you're sacrificing volume, if you force everyone through a website that you control, you can often compensate in terms of profitability. At least that's what I heard. Again, I haven't done it. I'm very reliant on Amazon for my books because I wanted the most hands-off version possible. And so for me, the Amazon flywheel is very important.
CK has a question in the chat. CK, you want to ask it yourself?
Sure, Rob. So you came from the startup world, you were serving, you know, whoever, and then now you choose to serve aspiring authors or actual authors as your avatar. I was curious to know if how did you make that internal decision to say, hey, these are the people I really love, I want to hang out with, I want to spend more time with, I want to really help them. How did you do that?
My first business was so traumatic for me because we made all of our strategy decisions off of a spreadsheet, isolated from what we cared about. So we were young, you know, and we fell into trying to optimize the investment game. And we're like, okay, what's investable? Oh, big market, big business, fast growth. And so we kept bending our business to look better on a spreadsheet until we ended up in a situation where we had the investment money, but we didn't care anymore. And we're like, oh, wow, I've just like worked really hard to build a job I hate. And after that, I made sure to only choose customers who I enjoyed hanging out with. And that was a simple rule for me because talking to them, doing the customer conversations, doing the sales, dealing with their support requests, I found that if I legitimately liked them, all of that was so much easier to do all of the other business best practices. And I apply the same rule to my books. I'm like, I'm only going to write books for readers who I would enjoy hanging out with and talking to and listening about the problems of their day, because I need that to build up the understanding to, you know, create a good solution. And now writers, I found that I always enjoy talking to any writer, no matter what the subject of their book, no matter whether it's fiction or nonfiction or experimental poetry, because one, I enjoy talking to craftspeople and artists. And it's like, I love to hear how much people care about their craft and what they're trying to build. And then with nonfiction in particular, I care about anyone who cares about their subject matter. I have an uncle who repairs churches using traditional methods and hand tools. So if you have a cathedral from, you know, 2000 years ago, his team will rebuild it using the same construction techniques as it was originally built with. And so it maintains its authenticity, right? And to listen to him talk about limestone is delightful, right? Even though it's a subject I have no interest in, but he cares so deeply that comes through. And so to me, authors are often just, they're people who know something and who care. And it's like, yep, that's a customer segment I love. Then there's also, it's a very antiquated industry. There's a lot of vultures taking advantage of aspiring authors. A lot of people's books don't work. So there's like all these combinations that make me kind of mad. I'm like, this should be better. And so indie authors were on my list of customers I would love to serve for 10 years. They've been there. But the problem is I couldn't figure out the business model dynamics because they're very difficult to market to, because most authors write like one book. And during that book, they're running into all these problems and they sort of deal with them and then they know how to do it. And that like window to reach them is gone. And so I couldn't find a way to reach them at the moment they were running into the problems I could help them with. So I've had diagrams of, you know, software and products and everything for this segment for years, but I couldn't crack the business model. And then once I committed to writing this book, I was like, oh, that's my top of funnel. I can build a relationship with them after that and, you know, educate them about why these problems matter and what's going on. And so the book kind of enabled the rest of the business. And so now we've got software, we've got the paid authors community, and we've got a publishing business that sits on top of that. So we publish certain authors out of our community based on how they're, you know, the reaction they're getting from their beta reading. And anyway, that was a long answer, but that's the whole story. It's like, I knew I cared, but I couldn't find the business model until recently.
I really appreciate you articulating the outside in approach, optimizing for spreadsheet versus the inside out approach, optimizing, you know, what you ultimately care about. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And there's still, the way I see it now is market size or profitability is sort of a constraint. So I'm like, okay, I need this much money per month, or I need to get to profitability this quickly, or I only have this much to invest in getting the business started before it's break even. So those are like the constraints, but I'm not optimizing for them. They need to be good enough to work. But as long as they're good enough, that I'm optimizing for the more internal stuff. But yeah, again, I'm, you know, that's my style personally. I'm much more in the lifestyle than the scalable startup camp these days.
All right.
Love it.
So we are in our last 8 minutes. I have another question, Rob. This is in terms of engaging with beta readers. So my plan is to actually like what you suggested, just reach out to them, the current readers, and ask them for help. I was also thinking of maybe running a book club like this on the book I wrote. Do you have any have you encountered other authors doing something similar, and any suggestions there?
What Nirayal did is he had he called it a contributors program, and he basically said to his list, he's like, hey, there's a contributors program to contribute to my next book with your feedback, your insight, your opinions. He said he limited it at 500 people. So he said there's 500 spots. Like, if you actually contribute, you're all going to get thanked in the book. There's like at the end of his books, there's a page with all the names of the contributors. And he did it like that. And then once he had that group, he's, I don't know exactly how he managed it internally. I did it through a combination of direct one-on-ones plus the Slack group, but like not everyone likes community, not everyone likes the group. And it has a time cost to find a way to make that valuable and active and all of that. For me, that made sense because I was planning to then keep that community as a part of the future business that I was trying to build to serve these authors. And I guess that's part of my answer also, is that what do you plan to do with it next? Like building up a community of readers is very valuable in terms of the learning, but it's also very time consuming. So if you're going to throw that away as soon as you finish, there might be a more time efficient way to get the learning by just doing one-on-ones, for example. However, if you plan to continue that and maintain it and grow it and nurture it as a future asset, then it's very worth investing in. And something else I've realized, we don't have good features for this on Help This Book yet, but it was something I noticed on Google Docs, is that the manuscript itself acts as a sort of community for your beta readers. If they're able to start, because they're reading each other's comments, they're replying to each other. And it's something I would love to do in the future, but we're ages away from doing it. But after doing Workshop Survival Guide, which we did in Google Docs, I was like, man, I really missed a trick by not thinking of the manuscript in that way, because that was where the discussion was happening. And I was like, wow, how could I have supported that and enabled it and gotten more out of it? Both for myself and for my readers, as opposed to trying to create like a separate property away from the core content.
Well, Rob, you could actually see conversations between your readers in the Rome graph for
that's super cool.
Cool.
Yeah, I love it. All the questions and the thinking that's been happening on the Rome graph is so cool.
All right, maybe final two questions. Nakul is asking something in the chat. Nakul, you want to ask it yourself?
Hi, Rob. How are you doing? The question is around what you said regarding selling on Amazon or not. And my sort of realization around this is that earlier people were relying so much on marketplaces because they could not have their own audience, because they could not build their own audience. And with social media, they are able to do that. And people who are good at building brands, people who are good at building audiences will need to do less. They don't necessarily have to go to a marketplace. It could be a good bump. It could be a good add-on, but don't necessarily have to do that. In India, we are seeing this with many thrift stores. So people who sell clothes on Instagram. So many people have reached 10,000 followers, 20,000 followers. They have closed their account, that you have to send them a follow request to get a drop. So I find it very interesting. What do you think about it?
Yes, if you're building your own store, you need to be able to drive your own traffic. It is way easier to drive traffic if you already have a bit of an audience and a platform. There's other ways to build it from scratch, but it's hard, right? Like figuring out how to drive traffic is its own whole problem. So yes, I think you're right. It's a good distinction to make. If you're starting from scratch, you're unplatformed. It really makes sense to jump on to use Amazon to leverage that. If you already have your own site, your own blog, your own traffic, your own audience, then you might be, and Alex Hillman certainly did. And I'd imagine that was a part of his decision to remove his book from Amazon, because he'd been at 30 by 500. He'd been building quite a significant email list, Twitter follower, all of that. So he wasn't starting from scratch when he made that decision.
In addition to what you said about getting feedback earlier, which was that people are either doing one-on-ones or they're doing it through a community. One thing which I noticed with Tiago Forte, I follow him on Twitter. Sometimes when he has a blog post to drop, he would just say that, hey, I'm taking feedback on this till the morning tomorrow. If you would like to feedback, just DM me. I'll send you the link of the Google Doc. So I've done that a couple of times. And what you said about reading other people's comments and replying to those comments, that sort of is a community of its own, like just
Yeah.
being able to engage with how people are thinking about these things. So yeah,
it's really nice. And another dynamic that I think most authors don't appreciate is how deep the relationships you can develop with your readers are when you're working in this way. Like through the community and through my beta readers, I've met so many interesting people like, Khalil, who are great at what they do and who I never would have met otherwise. And so sometimes there's these questions about how to make it more efficient or more scalable. And I've gotten so much benefit by not making it, that much, not worrying about that too much and saying like, okay, how do I engage? How do I understand? Because you don't need feedback from 1,000 people. If you can get good feedback from 10 of the right people, that's going to give you the vast majority of the benefit. And you're also going to then leave with 10 good relationships, which you wouldn't have gotten the other way.
for sure. Just one last point regarding the same Amazon versus non-Amazon distinction was, this is my opinion. You can give me feedback on this as well. I think that the benefit of having a marketplace is to get traffic from those customers, get those customers to your own platform. So let's say if I am getting sellers via Amazon, Amazon is not sharing email addresses or personally identifiable information, but if I can send them an email in that link, which says that, hey, you can follow me on Instagram or follow me on Twitter, for example, right? So what do you think about this? That if you're, for example, using the marketplaces or these third-party platforms to sort of build and like get audience and build a relationship with them and then eventually get them to your own platform. So anything to say?
It's ideal. That is optimal. It's just hard. The conversion rate from book to email list is very low. And what seems to work best is if you have a value proposition on the email list that's tightly aligned with the value proposition of the book. So a good example is Atomic Habits by James Clear. He says, hey, you're trying to build habits. I will hold you accountable if you join my email list. And it's like, I will remind you every day about the habits you're trying to build, et cetera. And so in that case, he's built an email list that's aligned, right? It's got the same value proposition. Where it doesn't work at all is where you're like, you love my book, join my email list. Like, because people need and these days they need a reason for joining the list. So you want to design them together.
All right. Thank you.
Cool. So let's have two last questions, quick questions from Remy and Amir.
Hey, a really quick question. I heard you say you have ADHD, and I recently suspected that I may have ADD. Have you written on the subject, or do you have any advice?
I haven't written about it, but I do have a little bit of advice. So I only learned this, this year, super recently. And one of the reasons that I liked books is that I could do them at my own pace without collaborators. So I've always been a very good individual contributor as a programmer, as a teacher, a writer, but I was very bad when I had to work closely with other people. So management, I was terrible at, for example, because the idea of having to do kind of daily or regular check-ins with my team, I would always eventually kind of fall apart. Whereas with books, if I needed to take a couple weeks off to recover, I could give myself that space and come back with energy and enthusiasm. But what I've found recently, I started working with an ADHD coach about 4 months ago called Dr. Larry Jones from enabletables.com. And it's been so cool because with his help, I've been able to start anticipating the areas and the tasks that I'm going to have problems with in the future. And then whereas before I would have gotten halfway and given up or not even started, now I go, okay, that's important to me. And I know I'm going to be bad at it. So how can I build support structures and processes, as we talked about now, so that I'm going to be able to succeed at that later? And it's been really important for allowing me to build a slightly more, bigger, more ambitious business. And also it's been great for my personal life as well, to realize oh yeah, these arguments that I've been having for 15 years, in my personal life, I can build a system to be better at that thing. And then it doesn't come up as much. So that's it for me. It's an ADHD coach is an awesome way to start and pretty inexpensive. And then you can, ease into it from there.
Thank you very much.
Cool. So last question, Amir.
Yeah, thanks Khalil for this opportunity, and thanks Rob for taking the time and sharing your all your insights about how do you go about publishing your thought process and everything. Really great. I think one thing common with this group is we all want to be sort of authors. The other thing that is common is we all are Roam users and quite an enthusiast about Roam and how it helps. I just want to know what's your take on the whole tool for thoughts that is coming up, and not specific to Roam, because we have a lot of other tools which are also coming up. A lot of people are Obsidian enthusiasts. A lot of people find Notion also like serve the need. So I just wanted to pick your thoughts on what is your model for tool for thought tool that you use, or what's your thought on Roam if you actually are a Roam user? And what are the trends that you see that probably we are missing, but you are actually into?
And so are you talking about specifically kind of capturing the ideas and the connections and the personal knowledge base, or do you mean for writing the finished book within Roam?
Not specific to writing a book, but just maybe capturing tools and thoughts, or maybe also like the whole interlinking of these ideas. So what's your thought and any trends that probably we are missing, but you're in tune with?
I used Roam for a while and I really liked it. I stopped largely because no one else on my team used it. And I like to have everything like, you know, on fewer tools. There's a friction for me in having extra tools. So I eventually got pulled back to Notion just because of my team, which it doesn't do Roam's job nearly as well as Roam does, obviously, but whatever. And for me, it's going to depend again on the type of book you're writing. So the books I write, like they fit within a coaching conversation. I'm not pulling all of these like different types of knowledge together into a big new idea. I'm saying like, oh, you want to learn how to like do an ollie on your skateboard? Let me teach a bunch of people how to do that, figure out what works and what doesn't, and then write that teaching down, you know, and test it along the way. So when I'm doing it, it mostly fits in my head. Now, again, that's probably not optimal. I'm probably forgetting all sorts of interesting stories and examples and quotes and anecdotes. And I do wish I had a way to go back and get all that stuff. And truthfully, I just don't. It works for my style of writing. But that doesn't mean it's, you know, it's right for you. And I love it. I mean, I love what Roam does, and like capturing all this stuff is so important, or helpful, I would say, I guess.
Thanks, Rob.
I'm also interested in the idea of interactive books. Like Janelle Loy made a Newsletter OS as a Notion book. I'm forgetting his name, but there's a dude, you know, people are writing books in Roam. It's so cool. It is hard. Like I have no idea how to design a book like that. But someone will figure it out, you know, and someone will write how to write useful interactive books, and I will probably read it because I'm interested in how to do it. I just don't know.
Cool. Okay. So we have reached the end of this book club. Thank you so much, Rob, for writing the book and for opening up this possibility for us who also want to write books. And thank you, everyone who joined this book club. So good luck to everyone in their own books, and let's continue helping each other write useful books. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
Thanks, Rob.